I was recently stuck in traffic with an old friend, the kind that keeps talk radio humming in the background at all times. As the host railed against biased mainstream lies, my friend suddenly slammed the steering wheel, his face flushing with genuine anger. He started venting about how the new administration needs to just pull the plug on the networks he hates. "It's the public's airwaves," he shouted. "They have a duty to serve the public, not just an agenda." He was passionate, almost desperate for a return to some standard of objective truth. But then the radio host shifted gears, mocking the very idea of presenting an opposing political view as weakness and capitulation. And just like that, my friend laughed, cheering him on. That cognitive dissonance was startling. In one breath, he was demanding a government mandate for fairness based on the scarcity of airwaves. In the next, he was celebrating a media ecosystem built entirely on the destruction of that exact mandate. He didn't realize it, but he was mourning the death of a 1949 FCC policy while aggressively cheering for the very deregulation that killed it. That specific contradiction, wanting the government to enforce fairness in a world designed for partisan warfare, is exactly where we find ourselves today.
That experience, it just perfectly captures the cognitive dissonance that's fueling so much of our politics right now.
It's just stunning.
It is. This desire for a state-enforced shared reality, but it's colliding with the very profitable chaos of polarization. And that's really our mission for this deep dive.
Yeah.
We're going to trace that journey. We'll unpack the history and the eventual repeal of the FCC's Fairness Doctrine and show exactly how that huge policy shift created the partisan media landscape that we now see the executive branch systematically exploiting.
All right, so let's start at the beginning then. The Fairness Doctrine itself. This was an FCC policy, from 1949?
1949, yes. And its requirements were, on the surface, pretty simple, but just profoundly powerful.
So what did it actually demand from broadcasters?
It put two core public duties on anyone who held a broadcast license. First, you had to devote at least some of your airtime to controversial issues of public importance. You couldn't just, ignore the big debates of the day.
Okay, so you had to engage.
You had to engage. And second, if you covered an issue, you had to ensure a reasonable opportunity for contrasting viewpoints to be presented.
So it wasn't about the government telling you what to say, but making sure the public airwaves, which are, a limited resource, were being used to inform people broadly.
That is the absolute key. The entire legal foundation was this idea of scarcity.
Scarcity.
Right. Back in the 1920s, the 30s, when all of this was being set up, there were only so many radio frequencies to go around. So the thinking was, since the public owns the airwaves, getting a license is a privilege.
Not an absolute right.
Exactly. It came with strings attached. You had a public trust obligation.
And this wasn't just some FCC rule. This was tested all the way up to the Supreme Court, right?
Oh, absolutely. The big one was the 1969 Red Lion case. That's when the court fully upheld the Fairness Doctrine.
And their reasoning was all about that scarcity idea.
It was. They argued that because of the technical scarcity, the public's right to hear diverse views was more important than the individual broadcaster's desire for, total editorial control.
I remember that famous quote from Justice White.
It is the right of the viewers and listeners, not the right of the broadcasters, which is paramount. It just crystallizes the entire philosophy.
It's so fascinating because the court saw broadcast media in a totally different way than print. They would never tell the newspaper what they had to print.
And that's the critical contrast. Just a few years later, in 1974, the Supreme Court strikes down a Florida law that tried to force newspapers to give political candidates a right of reply.
That was the Miami Herald case.
That's the one. The court said, look, there is no physical limit to publishing a newspaper. The scarcity argument just doesn't apply here. So for decades, your legal obligations depended entirely on the technology you used.
Airwaves meant you had to provide balance. Paper meant you had total freedom.
Precisely.
So this system, this really robust, court-tested mechanism for promoting balanced public discourse, it was a cornerstone of American media for almost 40 years. What on earth happened in the 80s to kill it?
Well, the seismic shift happened in 1987. The FCC, which was led at the time by Chairman Mark Fowler under the Reagan administration, just officially repealed the doctrine.
And this was, I'm guessing, both a regulatory and a very political decision.
Ooh, deeply political. But they had their formal reasons, of course.
What were the justifications they gave?
Two main ones. First, They argued the media landscape had just fundamentally changed. I mean, cable television was exploding.
So the scarcity argument was dead.
They said it was dead. Why regulate for balance when there are 100 channels, theoretically offering infinite choice?
Okay, that's one. And the second reason was that classic argument about the chilling effect.
Exactly. The FCC claimed the rules were actually backfiring, that broadcasters, because they feared the bureaucratic headache of finding an opposing viewpoint,
they'd just avoid the topic altogether.
Right. They claimed the doctrine was reducing coverage of important issues, not expanding it.
And politically, you can see how this fits perfectly into that whole deregulation push of the Reagan era. I know Congress actually fought back on this.
They did. Congress passed a bill to write the Fairness Doctrine into law, but President Reagan vetoed it. He cited free expression concerns.
But this was more than just cutting red tape, wasn't it?
Oh, for sure. Many political strategists at the time saw the doctrine as a major roadblock to conservative messaging. Getting rid of it was seen as essential for creating a media environment that was, well, more favorable to their side.
Which brings us right to the present. The repeal wasn't just a regulatory change. It created this huge commercial opportunity. How did taking away that fairness requirement totally change the business model of news?
It made bias profitable. It's that simple. When you remove the mandate for balance, the commercial logic of focusing squarely on one ideological audience, it just skyrockets.
Friction doesn't sell.
Validation does.
Okay, so where do we see the immediate result of this vacuum?
Well, the textbook case is the explosion of conservative talk radio in the late 80s and early 90s.
Rush Limbaugh.
The prime example. Figures like him were able to build these massive national platforms, totally free from any obligation to provide equal time. And they became commercial gold mines by just catering to one specific, very passionate audience.
And that model, of course, migrates very quickly to television.
Of course. The rise of 24-hour cable news is the next stage. You have Fox News launching in '96, explicitly catering to one ideological niche, and it was a massive success. Later on, you see networks like MSNBC shift to appeal strongly to a progressive audience.
The fragmentation was complete.
Totally.
So the technology, cable, it created the capacity for more channels. But it was the repeal of the Fairness Doctrine that created the incentive for those channels to be so aggressively partisan.
You've got it. And that leads directly to the echo chambers we're always talking about today.
Right. If you only ever hear things that confirm what you already believe, you naturally just grow further and further apart from people who are hearing the opposite.
It's a huge contributor to our political polarization. It makes any kind of shared national conversation almost impossible.
You see it so clearly in those anecdotes you found. The retired radio engineer, Elias, who said he used to think the Fairness Doctrine was just a bureaucratic annoyance.
And now he misses it. He misses that required friction. He realized that the mandate, as tedious as it might have been, was kind of the societal glue. It forced this uncomfortable but necessary collision of ideas that kept people tethered to some kind of shared reality.
And that story about Sarah at Thanksgiving, trying to talk politics with her dad and realizing they don't even share a baseline set of facts anymore.
Yeah, that's the real world cost, isn't it? Her experience of a language barrier shows that the scarcity of signals has been replaced by this infinite curated abundance. Her dad is only getting one frequency.
Which brings us to the really dangerous shift that we're seeing right now.
Exactly.
The focus of the current administration, starting in 2025, seems to have moved beyond just the harsh rhetoric, the fake news and enemy of the people stuff, to something more systematic.
The rhetoric of the first term, that created the atmosphere of distrust. The actions we're seeing now, starting in 2025, are providing the structure to actually exploit that atmosphere.
And the biggest move seems to be centralizing control over agencies that are supposed to be independent, like the FCC.
That's the first step. They issued an executive order early this year, and it's aimed at bringing independent agencies under much closer presidential supervision.
What does that mean in practice?
It means that significant regulatory actions, like the FCC changing its rules or doing a major license review, now potentially need White House approval before they can even move forward.
That sounds like a fundamental power grab. Basically, the president asserting the right to pull the strings of regulators who are legally supposed to be operating outside of direct political influence.
That is precisely the criticism. And under the current chairman, Brendan Carr, we are seeing concrete actions at the FCC that critics are calling overt weaponization.
Okay, so let's get into the specifics. What are some examples of the FCC applying this kind of pressure?
We're seeing some pretty clear patterns targeting news outlets that have publicly clashed with the president. For instance, the FCC reopened an old complaint against CBS News about a 60 Minutes interview with Vice President Harris.
And the timing on that was suspect.
Highly scrutinized, yes. It happened right after the president's public attacks and a lawsuit against CBS. They also reinstated some previously dismissed complaints against other major networks like ABC and NBC.
So they're using the regulatory process itself, the very license requirements that were put in place decades ago, as a tool for political retribution.
That's how it's being perceived. And it goes beyond just direct news targeting. There's an effort to broaden the pressure points. The FCC launched investigations into diversity, equity, and inclusion DEI policies at huge media companies like Disney and Comcast.
Now, how does that connect to a broadcast license? That seems like a stretch.
It's a huge stretch, and that's why it's so controversial. Critics argue the administration is linking a company's broad social policies, which have historically had zero to do with transmitting a radio signal, to the technical qualifications you need to hold a broadcast license.
It's a way to pressure companies on issues that are ideologically contentious.
That's the fear. And this pressure isn't just on private media. Government-funded outlets are a huge target.
Right.
We saw that executive order that led to the shutdown of some Voice of America operations. Now, a federal court did put a temporary hold on that.
Citing procedural flaws.
Yes, but the intent was crystal clear.
Wow.
Take operational control.
And then there's the constant threat to defund NPR and PBS.
The administration announced a plan to ask Congress to rescind over $1 billion in funding for the Corporation for Public Broadcasting. They cited alleged waste and bias. If that were to succeed, it would functionally eliminate a massive piece of public media reporting in this country.
This whole toolkit, it also includes controlling access, doesn't it? I'm thinking of that correspondent Marcus, who described the dynamic as moving from tension to total bypass.
Marcus's anecdote is so crucial. Because instead of even fighting with the mainstream press, the administration is heavily favoring these niche partisan networks.
The very outlets that exist because the Fairness Doctrine was repealed.
Exactly. By doing that, they effectively curate their own reality. They just bypass any skeptical press pool. The power of the press to hold an administration accountable is just so diluted when the press itself is fragmented and can be so easily ignored.
When you lay it all out like that, it's hard not to see the international parallels. These actions seem like they're lifted directly from a global playbook.
They are. I mean, this mirrors what researchers call the authoritarian playbook. It's what we've seen liberal leaders do to consolidate power in places like, say, Hungary under Viktor Orban or Turkey under Erdogan.
The same patterns. The systematic delegitimizing rhetoric, using regulatory bodies for pressure, taking control of public media.
Undermining institutional checks. The patterns are identical. And while the U.S. still has very strong constitutional checks, the First Amendment, the court system, these regulatory strategies are specifically designed to test the limits of those checks.
How so?
By relying on procedural actions and these vague FCC standards, they make court challenges really difficult, or at least very, very slow.
So if you have a media landscape that's already polarized, already distrusted, and then you have the executive branch systematically applying this kind of legal and regulatory pressure, what's the ultimate consequence for a healthy democracy?
The implication is a deep and, frankly, a pervasive chilling effect. Journalists become more hesitant to investigate powerful people. Public accountability gets weaker. And trust in any information source just erodes even further. When the entire system is designed to reward profitable bias and punish independent scrutiny, the ability of citizens to make informed decisions about their own government, it just starts to disappear. So, to synthesize the trajectory of this deep dive, the repeal of the Fairness Doctrine fundamentally destabilized the public media environment, moving it from a public trust model to one where profitable bias reigns. We are now seeing the logical consequence. An executive branch that is strategically and systematically applying coordinated regulatory and legal power to influence and control information flow using tactics seen globally where press freedom is actively declining.
We recognize that this structural shift, enabled by deregulation, has created an environment where systematic regulatory and executive pressure can be applied to manage and influence the information available to the public, placing American democracy's ability to achieve accountability in a highly vulnerable and precarious position.